Now you'll have to excuse me because for whatever reason, my kind of background just isn't working today. The Riverside platform just decided it's too much strain for my Frankenstein of a computer. But anyway, don't mind my mess. I know I made a video about keeping your work area clean. Sorry. But as always, I am an author. I love writing. I'm in no way, shape, or form qualified to tell you how to do your stuff, how to put your pen on paper, so to speak. But I'm just laying out opinions, experiences, tips and topics for discussion, and so on. This one might be a tad bit longer than the usual, not because we're covering multiple things like before, but because this is something that I'm currently dealing with the Eternal Crown. And of course, what I'm talking about is something that you may have heard as Middlebook or sequel syndrome. So for those of you that haven't heard of it, what is Middlebook or sequel syndrome? Middlebook syndrome often occurs on the second or third book of a series, most commonly the second of any trilogy or a quartet. In layman's term, it's when that book serves no real purpose and you realize that once you write it and devote time to it, but really nothing happens that you couldn't have had happen in the third or fourth book. So basically you have 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4 books, and you realize that you could easily read that book 1 and book 3 would make sense without book number 2. Now, book number 2 is very important in your eyes, but as you read it, you realize that it's kind of just, it's not the same vibe, not the same pace and stuff like that. And so you start thinking to yourself, is this really needed? Did I just waste my time? It's a lot of numbers, but when you write, if you feel or realize that you would have written, or you could have written something else with a lot more impact, or who just feels like it's just there for decoration. In other words, your sequel could have just been an email. It didn't need to be a meeting. It's a lot harder to spot than in syndrome or fatigue. So really, this video is not so much how to overcome, again, because I'm dealing with it now, but how and when do we know that it's happening? I know I'm kind of rambling at this point about sequel syndrome and what it is, but I think you guys get the gist. If you've watched some of my other videos, one of my favorite pieces of advice is that the best advertisement for a book is another book. I still stand by it, but what ended up happening is that a lot of new writers plan a series and treat it as their first baby, but then fail to realize that spacing and tone, like in the other videos, are just as important as what they're actually writing. While pacing isn't 100% make it or break it, some people are comfortable sprinting through ideas. It typically does cripple a lot of first time, even some of the existing veterans. I mean, you've probably seen a few people write 3, 4 books and then get stuck on the 5th. You can still have very successful stories or series with your own pacing, but remember, writing is subjective, and I'm sure all of us have read a sequel at some point and been like, I could have done without this. Another way to put this is that when you are suffering from Middlebook syndrome, you're essentially writing that filler episodes for a show or an anime. Yeah, I said it. Some animes, like specifically Naruto, which is near and dear to me, have a lot of filler episodes. It's exactly that. I said it. I'll die on that hill. So how do we detect of a series can spend lots of time to future events? That's key. You could have 2 or 3 chapters leading up to chapter 4 or 5, and then realize that you just spent 2 or 3 chapters leading to a specific event. Now, that might be normal depending on how you organize your thoughts and whatnot. It might not necessarily be, I guess, book syndrome if you're on book 1 and you still do that, but there still has to be a story at heart, and that's the key there. There has to be a story at heart. It can't be all exposition and filler. Be honest with yourself when you review. Does this second part of your series have its own story to tell? Does it have its own conflict, a satisfying arc? Is there something in there that really differentiates beginning to end? Are you bored of reading it? If the answer is yes, well, it's time to really realign. Now, how do you win against Middlebook syndrome? Again, I'm dealing with it right now. Not exactly sure, but what have heard online, or what I've gathered from some information, Middlebook syndrome is a lot like imposter syndrome in the sense that everyone's battle to overcome is going to be different. One of the small things that you can do is really back to your outline. If you don't have an outline, maybe make. I know that goes against some of you writing. Some of you guys like to, just write as you go. But if you run into this, if you feel like you have reached Middlebook syndrome, write an outline. Expand your outline from bullets to literal sentences and scenes to see if any one of them is difficult to bring to life, or if they just naturally become fillers or contain filler information. If you write the outline and you read 2 or 3 bullets that are very, very similar, please do yourself a favor and scratch 2 or 3 of them out. And then that will reflect in that writing. Whenever you reach a point like this, you need to return to your roots. And for those of you who think otherwise, you see it all the time with actual stories. You need to go back to where it all happened. That famous trope, it's a trope, but it's true and it helps. It's not only a solution, but yeah, it's still out there. For those of you who don't outline, again, it might be a little bit harder, but the same applies. Start at chapter 1. Ask yourself the same questions as you do when you do your own read and review. Alternatively to all of this, if you want to do an outline, you don't want to listen to that. Let's go back to saying, fight saying with a saying. For those of you who are hardcore about your vision and really believe that what you have, which there's nothing wrong with that, but are still fighting sort of nagging feeling in the back of your mind. I gathered this saying from, excuse me for butchering it, Robert Plamondon. I'll have his link on his stuff in the description below, but he basically said, never compromise your current story in any way whatsoever to benefit the hypothetical future story. Over deliver on your current project. Don't do your older, wiser self any favors. In other words, live in the moment. What you have in front of you right now, that's what you need to worry about. If you have to cross stuff out, if you have to edit, what you have, do it, And I know that goes against the first Right and Wrong episode when I said, yeah, if you're jumping around and you kind of create this library for yourself and eventually you get to this point where you can choose ideas from this internal library that you've created. It kind of goes a little bit against that, but still, that is just what you need to do to get across that hurdle. And quite frankly, after discussing it with Robert, I kind of like his advice. The purpose of this segment. So if you guys have better solutions, leave it there, man. I'll take it up and I'll put it up here. But live in the moment. Don't think on how you'll connect the dots. I like to drop. I like to say that's a drop line moment, but anyway. But a new make. Never mind. Anyway, those are my 2 cents. If you've dealt with Middlebook syndrome before, you have, if you've dealt with Middlebook syndrome, or you have any experience or other remedies, please leave them in the comments. If you found this helpful,